Ladies and gentlemen, open banking pioneers, hello and a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us around our campfire. Now we're going to be discussing open finance and financial inclusion, building a better future. At OBE, this topic is close to our hearts. Now it's a huge topic and sadly, one we hear too much about every time we listen to the news. So where to start? The cost of energy has pushed inflation over 10%. We're at a time of unprecedented instability. Unprecedented is a word we all use far too often these days. The markets look like they're firmly in control of fiscal policy and stand ready to punish anything that they see as reckless government spending. For many people, there are hard times ahead. So what can we do about it? How can we help shift the dial and collaborate for good? Collaborate, that powerful and all-important word. Now, the financial services industry, we exist and the sole purpose here is for giving our customers the tools they need to manage money in their personal lives and their business lives. Now, in the process, we've developed an incredibly powerful system that helps people get where they need to be, whether that's mitigating risk, building wealth, building resilience, and making the most of the opportunities that life presents. But far too many people, and that really should be underlined, far too many people find themselves frozen out of that system. The way they earn, the way we spend, and the way we save has changed faster than the systems designed to support us. So what does that mean? So for huge groups of people, the change has left them without access to exactly the kind of services that are so important when it comes to weathering economic storms. Now, for both people at the forefront of that change, so that's the gig workers, the digital nomads, the side hustlers, and those great resigners, and for those that are digitally and economically excluded, the pace of change has left them behind. Financial exclusion damages their chances of success. But we believe it doesn't have to be so. Financial exclusion is driven by opacity, and it's that antidote. It's the kind of transparency is at the heart of open banking. Open banking truly creates life-enhancing opportunities. Whether that be lenders like Salad Money that lend to nurses, the people that we're all clapping for during COVID. Now, did you know that most nurses go into overdraft position just a week after they've been paid? They borrow at a disproportionately high rate of interest as financial products are priced for risk. By giving their secure consent for Salad Money to look at their bank accounts, Salad Money, amongst other data points, can see that they're being paid by the NHS and can lend at far more reduced rates. Or let's look at other TTPs like MoneyHub that are working with the Big Exchange, co-founded by the anti-poverty charity. Here, MoneyHub's open banking API allows rental payments to be recognized, supporting credit rating enhancements. Now, that's cool. Other amazing use cases from the MoneyHub team in countering financial exclusion. Now, they're working with Vodafone, identifying benefit payments in their customers' transaction records, allowing for lower tariffs to be applied. Technology is so clever, but let's never forget it's the people collaborating together that make it happen. Now, there are so many use cases to share that working with our good friends at Innovate Finance, we're going to start collating them to inform and inspire. Now, those are two watchwords for us at OBE: to inform and inspire our global community to continue to make a defining contribution. Now, the use cases I've just mentioned, I also shared during my recent trip to Brazil. Financial inclusion is also, you'll not be surprised to hear, a red hot topic there too. So let's have a look at some of the data that's been kindly shared by the fantastic team that invited me over to Brazil from the British Consulate. Now, we're going to be doing more with these figures later, but I just want to share just one. 21% of the population don't have bank accounts. That's a disproportionate amount of those are from rural areas, female, which is shocking, are between 18 and 29, and from lower social classes. Now, just hold that thought just for a moment. As well as addressing some of our social, economic issues that we clearly have at home right now, I believe that we can share the very best of the UK to inspire other markets and be a catalyst for greater financial inclusion worldwide. So open banking, quite simply, can be divided into payments and data. It's democratizing that data, us giving our secure consent for a specific purpose that creates life-enhancing opportunities. So how do we start to shift the dial to make our world a fairer and far more financially inclusive one? Well, our panel today brings together the best of our community to have a passionate and very relevant debate. Now, you told us you wanted to hear more from Chris. We heard you. Lord Holmes will be hosting our panel, starting with a fireside chat from Pooja, the Director of Public Policy from MasterCard. Then we have a panel discussion with not just one, but two regulators, Adine Walsh, the Interim Chair from the PSR, Helena from the FCA, another speaker who returns by popular demand, and Paul O'Sullivan, who I know is just brimming with data to share, and the absolute brilliant and tireless Janine Hurt from Innovate Finance, who with her hardworking team do so much for us all to champion this cause. So Chris, let the debate begin. It is my great pleasure, my lord, to pass you the mic. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen, and a very good afternoon, good morning, good evening to wherever you are joining us from around the globe. It's a lovely, sunny autumn afternoon here in London, and it's great to be back around the campfire with you all for a subject that probably I care about more than any other in this space. We can have the greatest FinTechs, and we have some of the greatest FinTechs in the UK. We can have innovation, we can have funding, we can have policy, we can have regulation, we can have all of that. But for me, we cannot consider ourselves to be a civilized society if we don't fundamentally, thoroughly, and sustainably deal with financial exclusion and turn that into financial inclusion. And that, as you've already heard, is a subject for the fireside chat and the panel that we're about to embark upon. Why? Because without financial inclusion, yes, there's social waste, there's psychological damage and scarring. But even if you only believe this for economic reasons, which I know you don't, but financial inclusion even makes sense just on the economic. Put the economic, social, and psychological together, and you've got something which every nation, every institution, every city, every community, every individual should care about. That's what we're about today. Much less of me, much more of our fireside and the panel. Delighted to be joined by Pooja from MasterCard. We'll start this off, Pooja. What does financial inclusion mean to MasterCard?
Thanks, Chris. And can I just start by saying thanks to Helen and Open Banking Excellence for giving us the opportunity to talk about this, because it is such an important issue to MasterCard, not only from a business perspective, but also from the value that we add to the countries and markets, including the UK, where we operate. And, you know, for MasterCard, inclusion, both digital and financial, is part of our business. It's sort of, you know, part of the fabric of what we do. And we've got over a decade of experience in trying to bring individuals and businesses into the digital economy. And we made a commitment, a global commitment, to bring 1 billion people into the digital economy by 2025. So, you know, it is so fundamental to everything we do. I'll just start by sort of just reiterating that when we talk about financial inclusion, we have to do that with the understanding that financial inclusion now in the world we live in today is linked to digital inclusion. They are inextricably linked. And so when we talk about open banking, open finance innovation, or financial services innovation, including in the digital payments space that supports inclusion, you have to take into account both of these. And I'll just give a couple of statistics to help kind of focus our minds. There are still 1.3 million people in the UK that remain unbanked, and all the great work that the FCA has done on financial services for everyday people brought that to light, either by choice or because they can't access appropriate financial products for them. And even more worryingly, there are still 11 million people that are digitally excluded. So we could have really helpful innovation that helps financial exclusion, but actually if you don't help those people to be confident and have access to digital data, devices, or the skills, that innovation sort of becomes redundant to a certain extent. And then the other thing I'll just sort of begin by saying is that for MasterCard, when we think of how open banking has and how it can continue to improve financial inclusion, you have to think about it using two different lenses. And Helen touched upon this in her introduction, that you've got to look at it from the data lens, so that access to account information, which can help people manage their money, help them to budget, help to open up access to other credit lines for them, as well as compare products and services much more effectively so that they can find the product and service that works best for them. And then there's the payment initiation bit. And for us, it's the data piece and innovation in that space from an open banking, open finance perspective that is going to be the real driver for inclusion, more so than the payment initiation piece.
That's interesting that you rightly highlight digital inclusion and financial inclusion, and I've long been on that same path. And for a long time, I really believed that we'd need to get digital inclusion before we could really get after financial inclusion. But I'm pretty convinced now that it's financial inclusion, the payment imperative, the fact about how payment influences all of our lives in so many ways, and the other financial elements as well. If we can really get after financial inclusion, that could potentially be the driver more of digital inclusion. So thinking into what's happening in the regulatory space at the moment, there's obviously a lot going on. What are you planning to get stuck into in that regulatory landscape?
Yeah, so I think two things that I touch upon when we're thinking about the future regulatory landscape and policy landscape in the UK. And as we know, the Financial Services and Market Bill is making its way through Parliament as we speak. And I'd just like to sort of make 2 points here. One, going back to that digital and financial inclusion being two sides of the same coin point, I think from a regulatory and policy landscape, it's really important that the financial regulators, so, you know, the PSR, the FCA, when they think about inclusion, they also think about how they can work better with Ofcom to tackle that digital exclusion piece as well. And where, you know, going back to what Helen said at the beginning, where the collaboration piece from a regulatory and policy perspective needs to happen as well. And similarly for us in industry, what can we do with some of those providers of pure digital services outside of digital financial services as well? And then the other point that I'll pick up on is for us, one of the most interesting and important aspects of the future regulatory and policy landscape is going to be that international competitiveness and growth objective that is being proposed to be given to the FCA and the PRA. And these are important because the UK, and sometimes we perhaps don't realize this ourselves, has a very competitive and world-leading fintech, open banking and wider payments industry. And that needs to continue to grow. And for us, that these objectives could be the means, if you like, for regulators and policymakers to really think about what more they can do to champion innovation in digital payments, champion the industry as a means for export, as a means for trade, as a means for growth for the UK, for UK PLC, because there's a real asset here and there's a real positive opportunity here, both for government, but also for the regulators to think about, okay, well, what more can they do under the auspices of the international competitiveness objective to actually be a champion for the industry at the same time as obviously very rightly holding industry to account. And when I think about exporting, some of our world leading fintech and open banking innovation, I think it's really important that we also export the solutions that are driving inclusion. And again, Helen touched upon this, so it's great that our thinking sort of aligns, that actually there is exclusion at home that needs to be tackled, but we can also really help support financial inclusion in countries with high exclusion rates. And so you're doing well, but you're doing well by doing good, which is obviously one of the kind of key objectives that underlines everything that MasterCard does.
I think that's right. We've done well with the exporting of the FCA sandbox, for example, being taken up by over 50 nations around the world. And many of the businesses, as you know, that went into that sandbox weren't just fintechs, so FinTechs involved in financial inclusion. So I think what I'm hearing from you, you're saying all of us collectively and government, we need to sing, shout and holler about this a lot more than we're currently doing.
Yes, I would agree with that.
On which point, MasterCard obviously heavily involved in financial inclusions. Perhaps share with us a couple of examples of some of the organizations, some of the businesses that you're involved with in this space.
Yeah, very happy to. So one of the key things that we're doing is thinking about how we work with and how we support, using our expertise, our network, our technology, with what we call social purpose fintechs, and with partners that are developing products and services that account for faith, for sexual orientation, gender, age, ethnicity, social impact, and other what we call value-based frameworks that actually impact how people live their lives. And I'll give two very quick examples of that. So we partnered with a fintech called Algebra that provides banking based on ethical finance principles, including Islamic finance principles, for example. And so, because when we think about exclusion, it's not necessarily one homogenous group. There are different segments, there are different types of exclusion. That maybe there are products that work better if you're a certain gender, if you're a woman, the way you save, or the fact that you might be holding a job that's a bit more in the gig economy than necessarily a full-time job in the same way as your partner. And so for us, it's about working with fintechs that help cater to consumers that are excluded in all walks of life. The other quick example I'll give is a fintech called Hi, and with MasterCard, they launched a market first salary access card, which enables people to access their pay as soon as they've earned it. And it works like a regular debit card, but it gives employees direct access to the money they've earned in real time, with a limit in line with their earnings, of course. And so for us, by changing how people are paid using fintech and open banking and open finance technology, Hi sort of puts them directly in charge and gives them greater control of how they pay, for better budgeting, for example, and with the current cost of living crisis, these type of innovations are going to be more important than ever. And so, for us, this is how technology, open banking, open finance innovation can be inclusive by design, and it can really help improve digital financial inclusion as well.
Brilliant. I know you've been doing a lot cross-border and indeed with the World Economic Forum. Perhaps you'd like to say a little bit about that and some of the principles that you've come up with in this space. Yeah,
so again, this is an area where we think collaboration across with industry, regulators, and also with civil society can really help to make some real impact where it's not currently happening. And we did some work with the World Economic Forum where we helped to develop financial inclusion principles. And these are global, they're not necessarily focused on any particular market. And there's 7 principles. I'll quickly run through them. One of them is that financial services should be inclusive by design. That shouldn't be an add-on. It shouldn't be an afterthought for industry. It should be where industry begins the innovation from. So, when we're designing products and services, that's where we should start from, inclusive. There should also be an integrated system, between policymakers, regulators, and civil society, in terms of, when you're developing solutions, you don't look for problems, you do it the other way around. There should also be an element of being digitally led, and so really making use of that digital innovation out there. They should also be economically sustainable, and this is really important because everybody knows, and Janine and others will talk about this during the panel discussion, is that a lot of the groups that are vulnerable and excluded are the ones that have not been seen as economically viable, or as groups that bring a great return on investment for products and services. And so if you make the product economically sustainable, actually you're going to be able to create products and services for customers that might be seen as high risk, or seen as not as economically viable. And then informed by data is the fifth principle. Again, a really, really integral part of the open banking, open finance and inclusion conversation. I'll say a bit more about this later on, and we will in the panel as well. And then the sixth principle is trusted, which again, absolutely fundamental to being able to create products and services for more vulnerable consumers. If they can't trust that service or product is going to work for them, then we're starting from the wrong place. And then finally, they need to be effectively regulated. And this is where, for us, things like the FCA having perhaps a financial inclusion consumer duty, the PSR also thinking about under its objective of consumers and end users, making sure the market's working for them, looking at that inclusion piece perhaps in a bit more detail.
Brilliant. I'm sure everybody on the call will agree that they truly are the Magnificent Seven, and we'll be drilling into them more. Finally, for now, what frustrates you the most in this whole arena of financial inclusion?
I think what frustrates us the most is the fact that we're very short term in our thinking in tackling a financial and digital exclusion. We're not thinking even medium or long term, and I'll give you an example. So there is a real growth in flexible workers across the UK and across the world, and the pandemic has definitely pushed some of that growth, and it's going to grow in the next decade as well. But nobody seems to be talking about that. So nobody seems to be talking about what the market of tomorrow will look like, and therefore how open banking, open finance, and the innovation of today, which will then also be the innovation of tomorrow, how that can help the changing market, the changing segments and groups that may be vulnerable and may need support with their financial services, and how we can help them make the most of their income flows, and help them to save, help them to budget, give them access to pensions, for example. And again, that's an area that MasterCard, we've been doing some work in other countries, and I think there's a lot of international lessons as well that frustrate me that we need to learn in the UK. And we've developed a couple of payment solutions specifically for gig economy workers with gig economy platforms. And one of them is enabling gig workers to pay and to get paid a bit quicker, but also helping them to save or put money away when they get paid in those months where they're making money. So yeah, that's an example of something that I think we need to do better, is think a bit more medium and long term rather than just in the here and now.
Fantastic, Pooja. For now, thank you very much indeed. We're going to move into the panel now. If I can ask other panelists to pull up their camping chairs near to the fire. You don't need the blanket over your knees anymore. There's plenty of warmth now as we move into the panel. Ask Helena, Janine, Adina and Paul to join us. And first off, let's really look into the whole question of how has open banking improved financial inclusion, and how is this likely to impact as we move through towards open finance? And if I can start with Helena, please.
Of course, good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be sitting around the fire with everybody else. I think maybe it is helpful to start with, by saying, I suppose, that according to the Inclusion Foundation, 1 in 4 adults in the UK will experience financial exclusion at least once in their lives. 1 in 4. And as of 2020, over 13 million people in the UK were on relative low income, and 24 million demonstrated one or more characteristics of vulnerability. And we know that these consumers are more likely to experience financial exclusion. The government defines financial inclusion as individuals, regardless of their background or income, having access to useful and affordable financial products and services. One of our objectives at the FCA, of course, is to ensure that firms make financial services work well for all their consumers. And as part of that, we continue working with government and other partners to support financial inclusion in financial services. In parallel, I think technology has a real transformative potential, and technology can be used and have transformative potential in relation to financial inclusion. And that's why, of course, we continue to support innovation as a regulator that is good for consumers and businesses. And I think open banking is quite a good example as to where the use of technology can really help supporting inclusion and reaching good outcomes for consumers. And certainly we've seen quite a number of really useful use cases across the last few years as open banking has sort of taken up and developed further. So open banking, I think, has enabled a level of inclusion of people, retail customers, but also small businesses that perhaps would not have been in the past. And perhaps some examples are that we've seen, a range of initiatives targeted at inclusion, including helping customers in difficult financial conditions to better understand their situation, and charities using open banking to help these people. We've also seen open banking technology being used to develop gambling blocks to help people. We've also seen open banking being used to better enable access to credit for people who would not have otherwise been able to access credit, to have access to a loan, because they did not quite have a traditional kind of picture. Also, I think, we touched on that earlier, certainly, but with the cost of living crisis, being better aware of your finances can really be a powerful way to help better manage it. And certainly, I think we've seen open banking supporting that, in particular with sort of small, medium-sized businesses. And it has the use of open banking in combination with other tools has helped them better manage their finances, get paid quicker, etc. And perhaps it is also useful, because I'm thinking about what Pooja said around digital exclusion. It is also helpful to see that open banking has been used as a way to enable depositing or withdrawing cash. And I think that's equally important. So I suppose it's really about the open banking technology supporting a range of use cases that can help people that will be in different situations, but all of these situations may make their access to finances harder or more challenging. And today we have, I think, around 6 million people using open banking. But open banking is still quite narrow, because it's largely about payment accounts or bank accounts data. So imagine what we could possibly achieve if the sharing of data was broader. And of course, with this, we start thinking about open finance and how open finance could really strengthen and multiply these use cases and further support inclusion. And of course, I think we have to look at it not just from either a payments or a data sharing side, but actually from both, and how in combination they could provide a whole journey for consumers and support additional use cases. And I think maybe if I can add one last point in sort of relation to the point that Pooja made earlier, and I certainly agree that coordination and collaboration and us working hand in hand between private and public sectors is very much needed if we want to succeed down the route of open finance.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Janine, head, leader, grand fromage of Innovate Finance. The clue is in the title. Open banking, it's innovative, it's finance. How positive an impact have you seen it have on financial inclusion?
Well, thank you for those kind words, Lord Holmes. And Helen, thank you so much for organizing this, because I think it is just really such an important and such a critical time for us to be having this discussion. I mean, I would echo a lot of the comments that Helene has just made in terms of we've seen such a positive impact by open banking thus far. So we've seen just a vast change in terms of supporting financial well-being, supporting financial inclusion. We know that open banking providers are currently providing tools to people to help them better manage their money, to help them better understand their money, and to really see exactly where they are spending their money and how they can aid in terms of supporting and saving, investing, and helping to grow that, which is becoming even more important during the cost of living crisis. We've seen open banking tools, for example, also support on debt advice. So we know that debt advice has been enhanced through open banking because customers can access really tailor-built budgets, which automatically generate debt management options. So that is another area that we're seeing a real difference being made. And then also along the lines of faster loan processing. So we see so many players in the market using open banking to power instant affordability and identity checks, including those that have very thin or even non-existent credit files, as may be the case. So lots of positive progress, lots of positive movement. I think what our members at Innovate Finance are very, very vocal about is the fact that currently, as open banking stands, the emission of loans, of investments, and of pensions accounts is not operating in the best interests of the consumer. So as we extend out from open banking through to open finance, and dare I say even beyond that through to open data, we need to include all of these savings products, all of these investment products, because ultimately that's going to enable solutions that are going to give customers a full view of their total household finances and their major expenditures, and ultimately help unlock better solutions to help all of us through the cost of living crisis.
Spot on. Nadine, how does this look from the payment systems regulator perspective? Are you positive? How does this world look to you?
I was actually going to start with my banking competition remedies hat on, because that money was set aside to really improve competition for SMEs. And when I look at financial inclusion, I mean, I think the latest stats suggest that 24% of SMEs think they're going to go out of business within the next year because of all the various pressures. And when I look at the players that have participated in the awards, the language they speak is first of all about financial well-being for the SMEs. The interventions that they have made, and I think, Pooja, you talked about this, they have really thought about that customer journey. So they're not speaking about finding the problem that their solution will meet. They actually understand the SME needs. And what we have seen through that is, and everybody wondered about the digital inclusion aspect, but actually the number of SMEs that have now switched to digital providers, I mean, I think they've captured something like, 10% of that SME market. They're offering them marketplaces that really intervene in their financial well-being, and a number of the providers are offering alternative yeses. So I think it is really live with a number of the SMEs as to how the solutions provided have really helped with their well-being. But let's move on to consumers. So I would probably say from a PSR perspective, there are some examples today on how it has helped well-being. So for example, the confirmation of payee. which is built on open banking rails, that starts to give confidence. And when you talk about consumers embracing payments, it's about trust. It's about knowing that who you're paying, you know, that money is going to land in the right place, and you're not suddenly going to find yourself out of pocket. But it's actually shifting it on now to a completely different place with the account-to-account retail payments. And Pooja, you'll be happy to learn that in the strategic working groups, the various consumer groups that deal with different types of incapacity, different barriers to financial inclusion, they are very heavily involved in that, so that the end solution around the variable recurring payments will absolutely take on board their needs and look to provide the protections, the control, everything else they need in order to migrate to that. But the one thing I would call out is I am a magistrate, so I do see people who are absolutely desperate coming before us, who, with the best will in the world, their journey towards digital inclusion and financial inclusion is still some way away. And I think for a long period to come, in moving people on that journey from cash to prepaid cards or what have you, it does require intervention, and the payment systems regulator is very alive to that. And whether it's housing associations or whether it's other means towards financial education, there is an absolute part to play in that, so that people are informed when they're taking decisions about engaging with open banking payments.
That's an excellent coverage of that particular piece of it. A number of you have rightly mentioned the thread payments and data. So coming to you, Paul, you're obviously at an absolute digital colossus of a business, extraordinary story, extraordinary rise. So going right into the data, how, from your perspective, do you see data being used in terms of open finance, enabling financial inclusion, and what are some of the bits of work that you're seeing from your perspective in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I just, first of all, before I start and I warm up next to the campfire, I would just like to say what a fantastic panel this is. Everything said so far really resonates and actually inspires me thinking about some of the things that we've already spoken about and some of the highlights. It's really interesting. I think from a data and technology enablement piece, I think there is so much more we can do. And I'm really excited about kind of open finance, because it starts broadening that horizon from open banking into a completely new world where we can get a bit more personalized around the consumer experience and actually those life moments, because I think that's really critical, because it's highs and lows as people go on their own life journeys. It's really interesting, I think. So just on the data side, and I have drilled into a lot of data points in preparation, and it's staggering to see, because I think, first of all, we have done a great job. I think everybody is moving in the right direction. And when we look at the numbers of unbanked population globally, back in 2011 being at 2.5 billion globally, to be reduced in 2021 down to 1.4 billion is quite staggering. So we are moving in the right direction. However, I would say that there is a tremendous amount more we can do. I think data will absolutely unlock the potential of providing those consumers the critical information that they need at those moments that matter. And for me, data on its own is not enough. And when I look at some of the solutions that are out there today, it's fantastic. One great example is a customer of ours, Go Henry. And also I'm a customer of Go Henry. My son loves it. There's elements of gamification, there's education behind it, there's better management of the money, and it's also task driven, so he can actually save as he goes along. So he understands the value of savings. But actually that is quite staggering, because there's 60% of children that leave schools go uneducated around how they better manage their money. And if we look at open banking, that connection of accounts being connected, my account with his, my child taking his own responsibility of how he will manage and control his money, is phenomenal. However, what would be even better is if those data and the data points behind it drove some actionable insights, some real meaning. You know, we can see that you're starting to slip into your overdraft. You know, is there something else that's out there that's more beneficial to you from a product perspective? Things with lower APRs, you know, how can we take some of those data points around credit history and insights? You know, so many people that are moving from the unbanked into the banked generation, they have huge opportunity to leverage their previous data history, maybe in different countries, to bring insights into, you know, I want to open a bank in the UK, but you have no history on me. So how can we share that data to give confidence as well to open up new doors for those people? So I think data is fantastic, Chris, and it's gonna lead the way. But I think we've got a lot more to do on making that data into actionable insights that matter for people.
Completely, and very well put. And if there's a business that understands data, it's certainly yours. And putting that together with the payments perspective, Adine, how do you see open banking payments specifically enabling financial inclusion from both the consumer and the SME perspective?
So maybe if I start off with the SME perspective, and then I'll move into consumer's perspective, and that's not in any order of priority. It's probably more to do with the background that I've had. But, you know, with the SMEs, when you're out talking on the high street or whatever to the coffee shop, they will talk about the cost of doing business. In today's world where, you know, for the most part with COVID, it did move towards cashless. And they talk about the cost of those card payments. And I'll just give you a real live example. Our little local coffee shop saved £150 a month through switching from one acquirer to another. But they're still talking about the fact that it's still really expensive. It's still, you know, it's not only expensive in terms of the actual interchange that they pay, but it's also they don't get their money immediately. And for those types of organizations, you know, they're crying out for alternatives, but they have to be mindful that the consumer experience is frictionless, because it's all very well and good to have an alternative, but if nobody wants to use that, then that doesn't help your business at all. But they and I talked about the 24% of SMEs who think they will not be able to keep the lights on within the next year, talking about handing their keys back. I think that in terms of financial inclusion for them, little sole traders or whatever, having alternatives such as the open banking payments is absolutely critical. Then when you move on to consumers and, you know, and sort of thinking about what Paul has said, you know, like my daughter has Go Henry too, but there is an element of there are other people who are much further down on that journey. And how do you get those people to have confidence in open banking payments? And I think there are a couple of drivers when you start to look at, you know, what encourages people to have the confidence, but I am absolutely do not underestimate the education piece around it. But it's speed and security and control and trust and other factors that come into play. So we are very conscious from an open banking perspective, and that's why I talk about this is the future rather than the here and now, is that there will be some standards that mean that when you make an open banking payment, you know what you're going to get. You know what the dispute resolution process looks like. You know, the app scams is out there at this point in time for consultation, so that you know that if you're using a payment initiation service provider to make that payment to a merchant and something goes wrong, if you have acted in, you know, without gross negligence, that you know that you are going to be compensated if something goes wrong. So, you know, in looking at bringing, and actually just one other thing I would talk about is the variable recurring payments. And I know the team are involved, for example, in talking to some of the energy companies about really taking that to a whole new level. You know, at the moment, things happen on certain days of the month, irrespective of when you get paid. But with the variable recurring payments, there is the ability to work with an energy provider and, you know, set up some rules that mean that it comes out of my account when it suits me, rather than you take it when it suits you. And something like that, that is a change in culture. It's not just a payment type, but it's a change in culture for a supplier to recognize that actually it's better to get paid than to be chasing a debt. And, and actually to start thinking about that slightly more flexibly in terms of that customer experience.
Excellent. And Pooja, MasterCard, you know a bit about payments. How are you seeing this specific element of open banking in terms of financial inclusion?
Yeah, so I think for us, just picking up on what Aideen said, and then I'll go back to the wider conversation, just in terms of open banking payments at point of sale for SMEs, to give them another option. Absolutely, it's always wonderful to have more competition in the market, because it keeps innovation going for the benefit of the whole market. But I think what we need to do is just be careful and think about all of those really important things that make card payments such a good option, like, for example, the guarantee of payment for the merchant should the customer not be good for the payment, when the transaction is done, and that's essential. But then also from a consumer point of view, if they don't get the product that they are promised, again, for them to be protected in that scenario as well, everything from their flight being cancelled or the package not arriving that they'd asked for. So from a MasterCard perspective, all of these functionalities need to be built into solutions, both from the SME perspective and the consumer perspective. And what needs to also be built in is that inadvertently the consumer doesn't end up having to bear the cost of all of these functionalities being sort of part of the solution. So I'll just say that on that point, just taking a step back and thinking about sort of retail financial services as they are, and where open banking perhaps could really add value where it hasn't so far. So just taking what the panel had said about how open banking has been helpful. So at the moment, you've got the option of a basic bank account, and then you've got the current account with any sort of banking institution. And for us, there's a gap. There's a gap in the middle, because there's, for those people that have evolved past the basic bank account and they are a bit more digitally financially skilled and included, the jump is too high to a full-fledged current account. And so there is room in the middle for industry to innovate using perhaps open banking, and thinking about, okay, well, is there a product, is there a type of bank account that needs to be created to help that middle group of consumers and that middle section of financial inclusion? Because it's not as black and white as saying I'm either unbanked and therefore I'm excluded, or I've got a current account and I know what I'm doing and therefore I'm included. There's a group in the middle that we need to help, I think, using what Paul said about data being practical, having implications, what Aideen was saying about those consumer protections, that trust, that security, and then that skills piece and that confidence piece as well. So yeah.
No, they're very well put. So Helena, we've covered the data element, we've covered the payment element of open banking. If we're able to take this open banking regime and move forward into an open finance system, how do you see that impacting financial inclusion?
Thank you. So I think that there is real potential. So the way I look at things is we have built rails currently through open banking. We have built rails that are used both for sharing data. Sometimes we refer to this as passive, and for enabling a payment initiation. And that's the active side, I suppose, where you take an action. And if you go back to what Paul was saying, I think that's also what we have to think about when we think about open finance. I don't think it's necessarily just about sharing more data. It's what data, how you share, how do you standardize these things, but also what actions can you follow on the back of this. So if I take your thinking, I think, Paul, maybe it was around, how do you enable a full journey from I identify that actually I could I might be better off somewhere else because based on what I do, how I spend, etc., and then enabling me to then switch, to then go somewhere else, to do something else. And I think there are a lot of possibilities through using those rails that have been created through open banking. I do think, and we have said that as FCA, and we have sort of published call for input and feedback on that in relation to open finance. And I think we have said quite clearly that we think that there probably is a need for a regulatory framework to be put there in place. And in that context, we very certainly welcome the proposed smart data legislation that's currently making the rounds, of course, in the Parliament. And I think all of this together, because I think it is true that if you start thinking about open finance, so you start thinking about all different aspects of financial services, not just payments, retail banking, but also you think about investment, you think about pension, insurance, all of it together, then you also ought to start thinking about more broadly, right, and data. We talked about utilities and those use cases. How do you use financial services, open banking, open finance in relation to utilities? What kind of things can we learn? How can we then better serve consumers because we have this additional data and we can do more? So I think there are loads of potential, many things that can happen once we have a framework in place. But I do truly think that we also need to come together, and the industry needs to come together too around the table. So all different stakeholders need to come around the table and really think hard about what and how do we do that in the best way. And of course, from our regulatory perspective, you know, we work closely with HM Treasury, with others on you know, in the government side, but of course also with stakeholders, other regulators, etc. And I suppose one of the reasons why we are holding a sprint on open finance next month is exactly for that kind of purpose, to try and move us to the next level of detail of thinking about how we can collectively do something. And maybe to use what Pooja said earlier, I think it's about thinking how do you design it from the outset for that to achieve, you know, if we think back about inclusion, which is really what we started with, then how do you ensure that is you design it in such a way that it benefits all types of consumers and can cater for different use cases?
Well put, and you rightly highlight collaboration, the absolute reason for these campfires. Collaboration, without question, the most potent currency we all have in any context. So, Janine, the case has been made for open finance, not least in what it can do for financial inclusion. How confident do you feel about our travel to open finance? How clear do you think that framework, that roadmap, that journey currently is? What say you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I probably will preface it by saying, listen, I represent the FinTech community, which is known for essentially always pushing, being very ambitious, and wanting to see even more. So I would say I think the UK has done an absolutely fantastic job in terms of being a leader in this space. I mean, we very much are a leader on the open banking agenda, and we have set the precedent for the rest of the world. But now is an absolutely critical time, and we have to keep up the momentum because otherwise we will be surpassed by other regions around the world. That is very much down to exactly your point, Lord Holmes, around collaboration. So we need to make sure that industry is working with regulators, is working with governments to make sure that ultimately at the end of the day, consumers are benefiting from these new initiatives. Pooja mentioned it earlier, and I might just zoom out from the open banking onto the FinTech broader agenda, but the UK is a leader in FinTech. We are second in the world only to the US in terms of FinTech investment. We have more investment into FinTech than all of Europe combined. We are a global leader in this space, and we need to continue moving ahead and pushing forward for these initiatives to move open banking through to open finance, through to open data, and deliver on those pieces as well.
Brilliant. And it's important to consider this international piece. So, Dean, which countries do you think are really leading in this space, and what can we learn from them?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the payments, and I guess you have to caveat this with saying that there are certain interventions that have been made that may lead other countries to be leading in particular ways.
Yes.
But maybe if I call out the Netherlands, actually, because that has been using Ideal for years, and and is a very inclusive payment system. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the Netherlands, and also from the Nordics as well. Where they have migrated consumers, I think, very successfully from cashless to being comfortable with digital and that whole financial inclusion. And I mean, I have to mention Brazil and India, but there have been various interventions there that have led to the financial inclusion. But, back to just Janine's point very briefly, is I think we shouldn't underestimate where the UK is at, and with that collaboration, how much it can actually go further to addressing the financial inclusion.
Certainly. And Paul, you have a very specific international perspective. What are you seeing?
I mean, I completely agree with the point that the UK is the trailblazer, absolutely, in the fintech space, and it's quite a proud piece, being somebody who a very long time ago contributed to one of the first mobile banking platforms, and I think as we move forward, it is absolute critical that we continue to innovate. And with open finance, if we look at some of the business problems that we've got today, so we've got in the UK 11.5 million people have less than £100 in their savings, and 15% have zero. So when I look at some of the fintech initiatives that have emerged, things like saving pots, money pots, how can I take those 5-10p's from transactions and put them into a separate account that I can start building my savings up over time for things that matter. And I think as we build on that collaboration and we bring the ecosystem closer together, and especially with an open finance lens, I think we've got a real opportunity here to say, how can you take those money pots and those savings of pennies to offset some of the things that are happening right now in the economy, offset the high energy prices? Can we partner smarter and collaborate smarter to use some of that small capital, round up my coffee price to the nearest pound and offset it for my utility bills? Things like that will be an absolute game changer and should hopefully help us all move forward. And I'd like to see more initiatives like that as we move forward.
Fantastic. Time for one very quick question to each of you. One sentence. If you can do it in less than a sentence, even better. What is the one ask you would have of government when it comes to open banking, open finance, and financial inclusion? Helena.
Oh, this is a tough gig to start, especially as a regulator.
Don't worry, it's a Chatham House campfire.
I would say advancing open banking to open banking plus, do it in coordination or in a way that works with open finance and combine under smart data house. So all together and interoperable.
Very good. Like it. Janine.
How about get on with it? Let's get on with it and move it forward.
Magic. Love it. Aideen?
I would say link up the parts. Solutions are only as good as the adoption, and there are various obstacles to adoption, so link up the parts.
Fabulous. Paul?
Get behind the FinTech pledge and increase collaboration. Definitely link up the parts. Really like that.
Brilliant. Pooja?
I think everyone said it all, but I'll just end by saying, we can do well as an industry by doing good. So let's keep inclusion at the heart of the innovation.
Brilliant. You heard it there from all the panelists. Collaborate, come together, co-create, and great things can happen. To our panel, thank you very much indeed. Particular thanks to Pooja for the fireside. Thank you all for joining us today. Do please keep in touch. Love to hear all your thoughts. Everybody who's on the call, do connect with me at Lord Chris Holmes on LinkedIn. Thank you all very much. Helen, back to you.
Chris, thank you very, very much. Brilliantly hosted. My sentence would be, we're not there yet. Okay, so I have a little bit of feedback to share. My WhatsApp is just alive with lots of little red hearts and some amazing feedback. Seriously, a huge thank you to every one of you on the panel. You know, I'll share some more of this on LinkedIn. But what I have been asked to do is to share more about the PSR APP scam consultation. People are wanting to know more about the smart data regulation. People are wanting to know more about the educational side, and I'm going to help out a little there. So if our audience would like to lift their phone, at the bottom of the screen they can see a QR code. If you scan that QR code, one of the charities that we support is called My Bank. My Bank goes into school, and to Paul's point, to Adine's point, it helps to educate children. So that is a way you can make an open banking payment fast and secure today, right now, to help a brilliant charity. There are also loads of other charities that you can help. So what I need to do is to wrap up. There is one other thing before I start to do that, is that everybody would like more. And I would like to talk with the panel about how we can make this into a campaign, not just between us, but we all have networks. You know, we've got a global community. Janine has a huge, inspiring FinTech community. Everybody is wanting to continue and to create more and more momentum. And I think a lot of that is being driven by the cost of living crisis and people wanting to share and to collaborate. But I would like to wrap up and thank first and foremost all of the panel for your contribution, for your insights, and clearly for the amount of prep that you had done. So a huge thank you. That is another comment that I have heard on my WhatsApp. I would also like to thank my team. We are a small team, but a mighty powerful team, and a huge amount of effort goes in to making this happen. And we will have an audience from about 41 countries around the world. I will see the stats later. So we will share this link on LinkedIn, and we will also share edited content with all the panel so they can share that with their networks too. So please do keep the conversation going. I would like to wish everybody that's been watching, and those of you that will be watching later on YouTube, thank you very much. Goodbye, and please stay healthy. Take care. Thank you, everybody.